Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Tucker, and I am very happy to have all of you on this webinar. We're going to be talking about work-life balance in the age of AI, or the age of acceleration, which we'll get to in a moment here. But I'm happy to report that I'm joined this morning by Dr. Don Gilman, who is truly a rocket scientist. Some of us pretend to be, but Don is actually has been part of the Titan IV missile program, serving as mission manager for numerous classified missions. And he later led the North American and European operations for an automotive company acquired by the Robert Bosch Corporation. Don holds degrees in engineering, physics, nuclear engineering, engineering management, and a doctorate in organizational change, and travels the world today. He was just back from Japan. He has a major client in Japan currently, and so we're very proud and very happy to have you on the program, Don. And let's sort of set the stage here and tell us just a little bit, Don, about your recent work in organizational change, just so people have a flavor for your current thinking, and maybe a little bit about the book that you're working on.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Robert. Yeah. A lot of my work obviously is in organization change because that's my doctorate. But in reality, I'm a geek. So I speak geek, work with a lot of these tech companies, mainly just due to my engineering background and degrees and things. But what I found was there's absolutely no organization right now that is not going through some level of organization change. I've also got 3 kids that are in their mid to late 20s trying to figure out life. And
Right.
as a dad trying to give them advice, it's like, well, I have no idea. It used to be, just be an engineer. That'll be, you're
Right.
secure.
Right.
Not so much anymore. So a lot of my work now is around agility and resilience. And so the new book that I've got coming out is called Future Proofing. And it's future proofing your team, your organization, as well as yourself in order to be, relevant as we move forward into this future that nobody can really predict with any sort of accuracy.
Well, that's exactly what I want to take up in this, because the real question is, how do we not only just survive this new era, which I call the age of acceleration, but how do we thrive in it? And I will be speaking at the Lead Where You Stand conference, I guess next week. It's coming up
Yeah.
on the calendar. And that's the whole theme of the conference this year, is human flourishing. It's a major movement, and we can get into that in just a moment here, or a little while here, because I think everybody is asking the same question that you're asking there. How do I guide my family, my kids in this market, and how do I live the good life, and how do I contribute back, and so forth. And so this book that I wrote is called Build a Better Future. I have, like you, I've been around the block a bit on the speaking circuit, 54 countries, 200 of the Fortune 500, all 50 states. And mostly I was singing the song called Driving Growth Through Innovation, and teaching people the tools and techniques of how you create new products and services and business models to ride the wave of change in whatever area that you are in. And I crossed the 70-yard line during COVID, and I started thinking about my purpose in life going forward. What do I want to manifest? How can I give back? And that's why I wrote Build a Better Future, because it's focused on the skills, the navigational skills. The subtitle is mindsets for navigating the age of acceleration. Boy, that's a mouthful, right? Mindset. Do I need a new mindset? What is a mindset, right? So let's, maybe just as a way to kind of signpost this whole thing, let's just kind of get into some of those mindsets. Because the first mindset is preparation.
Right.
We got to be prepared. I'm a Boy Scout, hey, Eagle Scout. And I went around asking adults, hey, what does it mean, be prepared? Well, the adults didn't have a really good answer on that. They were saying things like, Well, you help the little old lady across the crosswalk, if she's in need of trouble. But where I grew up in South Carolina, there weren't a lot of crosswalks. But I've kept with that all this time, and I remember being unprepared. I was up in the Grand Teton Mountains on a solo backpacking trip, and I it was getting late in the day, so I pulled off the trail. I pitched my tent, made a little supper, and it was this gorgeous sunset across this meadow. And I'll go over here and check it out. And but when I got back ready to go back to my tent, I realized I got distracted. It was kind of dark, and I didn't have a flashlight. So I got over there, and for the next little while, I basically had to kind of sleepwalk around in circles, trying not to crash into a pine tree or whatever. And because I didn't have a flashlight, I slept out in the cold, and I was in no danger of freezing to death. But I tell you what, it got my attention. And the next day, I got up and I looked around, and wow, there it was. My tent was 30 feet away. And I always remember that because it's kind of like the times we're living in today. Conditions, made a little mental note to myself, FYI, conditions change fast when we're not paying attention. And so this preparedness mindset, I think my role here on out, to put it in a sort of a bottom line sense, is to help humanity, help anybody I can, to prepare. And so I've done voluminous study. I've read tons of books and articles and so forth on the future. What is the future holding? And I really do believe, Don, that right now we have arrived at an inflection point. You and I have talked about this, right? When we get together. And I want to just explore that inflection point with you, and maybe we can kind of mix it up here. I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but what is your take on the inflection point? How does it come across your language?
I actually want to dig a little deeper, if I can, just on that flashlight metaphor. So when you're looking at flashlights, right?
Yeah,
Because I think
right,
we all would love a flashlight, right?
right, right.
How do I see into the dark? Because the future is by definition dark. We can't see it. So how can I be prepared? I would say conditions change when you're not watching. Yes, and conditions are changing, right?
Right.
Even when you are watching, it's real. I mean, most people, if we're honest, did not predict where AI would lead us and where it has come. It's just so fast, so
This
recent.
fast, right?
And
Exactly.
so I think using that as kind of an example, what flashlights do you talk about in your preparedness mindset? In other words, what flashlights can we use? What can we take away? What should we be developing so that we
Beautiful.
can develop our flashlights and make sure we're never without them?
That is the most. I appreciate the question because that's what I've been thinking about all these years. And so the flashlight is a multi. It's just a metaphor, and the reality of it is that preparation involves looking at your information diet. Are you getting the data? Are you getting not just the headlines, but are you getting the deep dive of meaning and purpose? Where are we? So in the book, we have numerous tools. I'll just give you another one, right? Futurize your thinking. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means doing something that I'm not naturally good at, but that I have observed in all these interviews with people that I call tomorrow builders, innovators, visionaries, right? They're always looking out ahead and asking themselves, where will this one be in 10 years? Where will this one be in 1 year? I remember just not too long ago, my wife and I were at a nursery, and I fell in love with this tree. It was a southern magnolia. I'm from the South, and I wanted to buy it and had a certain spot in my mind that I wanted to put it. But my wife asked a real basic question of the nurseryman. Now, how big will this tree get? Well, when he answered the question, I realized right away, hey, it's not going to go in that spot. And she has been so good. She's over in Amsterdam right now, but maybe tuning into this webcast. But her family is just, this is the way they think. I mean, my family was like, we grew up in South Carolina on the farm, hey, it's $1 a carload. Let's go to the drive-in. Right. And so,
Right.
We'd pile in the car and sometimes in the trunk of the car to get
Right.
all of our people in there. But, they'll be, we'll be I'll pass through the room and she'll be talking to one of her siblings on the phone and she'll, now, do you think we should go to the luau on Tuesday night? Or, I just don't think that way naturally. Right. But I've
Right.
trained myself
Yeah.
to futurize. And
Yeah.
I've even invented a little tool here for people to use. It's called Ditto. And we talk about it in the book. What's the direction of this trend?
Right.
So you're reading the newspaper or you're walking through an airport or you're at your kid's soccer match and you're seeing a trend. The most important thing is that you realize that you're looking at a trend. Don't just be passive and wait for the New York Times reporters to tell you what's going on out there.
Right.
Have your own antenna. That's the most powerful thing you can have right now, right? So that's and then futurize. So what we say, ditto, what the direction of this trend? What are the implications? Wow. If we're spending all these billions on data centers and on AI, what's that going to do to the exponentiality of this whole thing, right? And so as futurists, we need to be thinking about where society will be in 10 years. Because just to leave it to the tech bros or to leave it to Silicon Valley to tell us, or to depend on them for saying, oh, your future is going to be so wonderful. I mean, just last week at a commencement exercise address at the University of Arizona, you know about this, right? Eric Schmidt, who is the former CEO of Google, lives here in town, or at least part of the time. He has this is one of his 7 houses, all worth $50 million or more. But he's talking about this great thing called AI, and he says it's going to be part of all of you, and it's just going to, be so wonderful. And the students booed.
Right. Right.
And he didn't see, it was like a Marie Antoinette moment. I don't know if Marie ever stepped to a microphone at a commencement address. Let them eat cake.
Right.
And it's like, right. I think there was sort of shock in his voice and in his face and sort of sadness, because I think he thought this was going to be like a great promise, but they were not taking it in this way, because they're looking at a job market that is absolutely decimated, at least at the moment here.
But I'm reminded of like Henry Ford when he said, look, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. They could not envision what he was envisioning. And I think the same was with Eric Schmidt. He envisions a use of AI that most of us cannot envision. Right. And he's been that way since the beginning. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about an early investor in Google that put up something like, $12 million for a 12% share. And people thought he was nuts, valuing it at $100 million. And he's like, yeah, who's laughing now? And the reason he did it, when he talked to them, the founders, and he said their vision was completely different, right? Their vision was huge, and what they thought they could do was huge. And he bought into it. And lo and behold, now he also invested in some like Lucid and some of the other car companies that haven't all done all
didn't
that
do so well. Right. Yeah.
Right. But in there, the reason I bring that up, because you also talk about not just the preparedness mindset, where you talk about ditto, but also your visionary mindset. Because I think there's an element of preparedness that requires being a visionary. It's the ditto, it's the direction, but also the impact, or the implications of that. So talk a little bit about your visionary mindset. How do you develop that? Because I think we're all, what is the future going to look like? I think we're all kind of worried about that. And he got booed because people are going, it's going to take my job. Well, that's a scenario, but is it the only scenario, right? How do we develop that visionary mindset?
Well, this is why I greatly appreciate discussing these things with you, Don, because you are such a visionary and you are such a possibility thinker. And I mean that. So let's talk about that visionary mindset a little bit. Well, first of all, let me just back up here for a moment, because I really do think we're at an inflection point. And some who look at these equations, they think that we're going to go off into this age of abundance. And so the vision that they have is that life will be better for all, that we'll cure cancer, we'll cure all these diseases, we will possibly go to interstellar space and explore that, and just all of these great benefits.
Absolutely.
And on the other hand, you have folks who are looking at the tea leaves and saying, But look where we have come already with technology and with these false promises that everything will be groovy. We have a mass income inequality. We have the shaping up of what we might call the extraction economy, where only a few companies control vast amounts of wealth, a few people controlling a vast, and for the rest of us, where are the jobs? Because all of this AI eventually, I mean, they're saying, AI can do my job better than I can. I think that's a misnomer, and I want to talk about that with you.
Yeah.
But those are the two stakes, right?
Yeah.
The president of Westmont College calls this, this particular vector, if you will, the new dark ages.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
I had lunch with Dr. Gail Beebe not too long ago. I said, do you still kind of believe in that? Because I wrote about the previous conference in Forbes where I write a column, and I actually quoted him on that because it got quite a stir among these folks
Absolutely.
that are all leaders in their respective areas. But
Absolutely.
so those are the two, and I think we're at this crossroads. And now let me address your question about
Well,
what
let
is.
me give a metaphor for that, actually,
Yeah, please.
because there's yes, and it's
Yes,
in
and
academic circles, we call that scenario planning, right? What's the most likely scenario moving forward? And what I've learned, we're going into eras, as you talk about in your book, where there are no patterns, right? We haven't ever been here before. This
right,
is unique. Now, we can look back at the fall of Rome, we can look back at, and we can learn from that. But the
right,
one pattern that I see emerging over and over and over again, when anything that is really groundbreakingly new. We're calling this the fourth industrial revolution. So you look at things like
right.
electricity, the steam engine, all these different, computers, technologies. But I want to rewind even further to the invention, quote unquote, of fire, right? Because when you
Whoa.
rewind all the way back there, here's fire. And there's, if you could have a conversation with them, they would say, oh, this is going to be fantastic. We'll be able to cook. We'll be able to heat our homes, our caves, whatever. This is going to be fantastic. This is going to change our lives forever. And then you're going to get others and go, hang on, this is going to burn everything down. It's going to burn the forest down. It's going to burn up animals. It's going to just destroy our world. This is horrible. Now, who was right? They both were. Right. But you look at how we have evolved as people, as users, quote unquote, of
Right,
fire.
right.
Can it still burn down? Well, yeah, we live in California, right? We know what fire can do. And yet, what have we been able to do? We have sprinkler systems, we have fire departments, we've put the safeguards in place, we have laws regulating what you can and cannot do with fire. So we've regulated it, we put up safety things. That's the beauty of human ingenuity. Yes, it's dangerous, and we can handle it because the benefits are pretty darn substantial. We want to get the benefits and we want to limit the downside. It's not ignoring the downside. And that's what I love about your preparedness mindset and the visionary mindset. We've got to have the vision for the implications and then prepare ourselves to make sure those implications don't come true. We don't enter into those dark ages.
Right. And to your point, because you and I have talked about this, not only from the standpoint of fire, something that elemental, which lightning could have sort of set off without
Right.
people rubbing things together.
Right.
Uh, but we could say that about the slide rule or the this or that, right? But
Yeah.
that does not comfort me
Hmm.
as greatly as it might or should,
Mhm.
because we're in a very uncharted space. So I am a firm believer in using history as a guide. And if we go with the premise that most futurists and perhaps even some optimistic historians go with, which is that the arc of human history bends toward progress,
Mhm.
right? So more people are out of poverty, more people, human mortality rates, all of those vectors are, for the most part, going up. So if we have this sort of baseline optimism, I agree and I buy into that. However, AI, because of its properties, unlike fire, it doesn't just burn, it learns, it thinks, and so we can't really know. We can try to regulate it a bit, and I fully reject and almost resent those folks in Silicon Valley who say, our politicians are so dumb, they can't even possibly do this, because I know some politicians and they're asking the right questions.
Absolutely.
And,
Mhm.
so we need to really figure out um, a new answer in that respect, and cast away all of those historical references to slide rules, because this is uncharted territory, and it is coming about at a time when our population is already sort of not doing too well. I had a couple of stats there that I don't know if I can come across them here, but just in terms of people, average American reads at a third grade level. Civic knowledge. You go out and ask people, name the three branches of government. They just don't know. Critical thinking skills are just falling off the way. And then, we have students coming up and they've never faced the sort of blank page. And,
Mhm.
and that's maybe something I'd like we could also talk about, because you're a very creative person. Folks on the call probably don't realize this looking at you, Don, but you are a former rock and roller, right? What did you play? In a fairly uh, prominent band nationally, Toad
Well,
the Wet Sprocket.
we were all in high school together. So yeah, that was my claim to fame, as we were in high school and did a few musicals together, which is actually interesting. So we did Oklahoma together. But before that, we were all in Music Man, which I thought was interesting because the premise of those, and again, this relates, trust me. But the premise of Music Man is the Music Man's a salesman, right? And he's kind of a little bit of a slimy guy, right? Harold Hill. But he comes to the towns that he wants to take advantage of, and he finds something that they're afraid of. And then he leverages that in order to
Mhm.
get them to give him all kinds of money to teach his kids how to play instruments and give them uniforms and all this kind of stuff. Hence the Music Man. And he comes to this one town and he finds the one thing is they've got a new pool hall, right? And so he stirs them up to, oh my gosh, pool hall. Pretty soon they're going to be hiding dime novels in the corn crib, and they're going to have nicotine stains on their index fingers, and all this horrible. And oh, we got trouble in River City. All this stuff, and he uses that for his own ill gains. And I think that pattern has just repeated itself throughout history. And I think we're
Right.
at that point now. I want to be careful of those people that are shouting from the mountaintops, the world is coming to an end, because hang on, maybe, but what can we do about that? And yes, the future is uncharted, but I would argue every future has been uncharted until we
Correct.
chart it. Well, who charts it? We
Correct.
chart it. And that's what I keep trying to get into my kids' head is you're the users, right? You're the ones who are going to put the
Right.
regulations, the laws. You're going to say what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And throughout history, we've done okay at that. A lot of missteps, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
I that's where my faith comes, right? That's where my optimism comes from, is when we see what these things, well, even the pontiff, right? In his letter today, he talked about we need robust legal frameworks, we need independent oversight, we need informed users, and to your point, Robert, we need a political system that does not abdicate its responsibility.
Right.
These are the things that are required. He's not saying don't go forward. He's saying here's the things we need to responsibly go forward and chart that and make that map. So I don't know. I think it aligns very well with what you're saying, which is the visionary and the preparedness. But we've got to kind of be looking at that and saying, yeah, it's not charted, and let's step forward and chart this. What are we okay with? What are we not okay with?
Well, I like your sense of optimism that we can become we again, and not
Yeah,
a divided population. And you know,
good point.
it's interesting in this current debate to see, for example, far right MAGA doom scrollers sort of sitting side by side in these auditoriums of public hearings where we're with liberals wearing the Birkenstocks, but both trying to figure out or to convince those in authority, we don't want this data center in our
Right.
backyard,
Yeah.
right? They're totally
Absolutely.
united. They've left behind all of the wedge issues of the past decade or so, which have just been so annoying in terms of trying to make progress as that we that you talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And maybe, as we speed along here, maybe this portion of the movie will be over, and we can then get back down to business. And we need companies like Anthropic, and the leader of Anthropic, because they have a more balanced perspective, and they can tell us how we can um, regulate AI to where it doesn't come back to harm us. And still, they can make gobs of money, and we can have that kind of future that you're talking about.
Right, right, right. And I think importantly, the Anthropic especially, and one of the reasons why he was there with the Pope when he unveiled this letter, the CEO, is that they are asking the tough questions. They have a philosopher on staff, for example, because exactly we are going into an area, and you talk about this in your book, but ethics, who gets to decide what's right and wrong?
Right.
Right. And throughout history, it's been us in a messy way. But the way to make us very often throughout history is to persecute, right? When we feel threatened, we come together. And I think that's the gift,
Yeah.
if I can use that term, of AI, is I think
Mm-hmm.
there's enough people now that are going, hang on, right? Wait a minute. We need to
Right.
think this through. We need to not be driven by pride. We need to not be driven by ego, by profit, by
Right.
homogenization, right? We need to move beyond that and say, are we looking at this with the right lens? And I think that's really where in your Ditto model, the implications are so important, right? Because what's the implication? I get it. And this is what the trend is and the direction it's going. Okay. But wait a minute, play that out, right? Where does this lead us? You and I have talked about, I think one implication of this is loneliness, right?
Right.
And we're seeing that. There's a big article in the journal again today about loneliness and a guy who deleted his AI chatbot because he was becoming isolated and it was leading him down, I'll say, unhealthy pathways,
Right.
right? Is that the future, right? Do we have to delete our chatbots if we develop an unhealthy relationship with them? I don't know. How do we play that out? If that's the implication, and we're seeing this cocooning that we've been so fearful about, I can order on Uber Eats, I can I don't have to leave, and I can have a great conversation with my chatbot. And yeah, it's actually fascinating. It's now the number one usage in 2025 it was of AI was relationships, companionship. Number two was coming up with new business models, so that's encouraging. But
Mm-hmm.
number one was that companionship element.
Well, that, relationships and companionship, that is sort of my pet peeve with
Right?
this tech megaforce, because at the base of it, I mean, you think about people who are selling tech,
Yeah.
you know, um, I always think about the guy that went around and said, we could put on here tips 20%, 50%, right? That guy was
Yeah.
popular, right? Because, hey, a little suggestive selling there. But no, I mean, just this notion of how do we sell, or how technology is selling itself, and what is the benefit there? It's always you reduce costs, you're going to have greater productivity, and you get rid of the human relationship, which is
Right.
so messy and so forth. And so we're just taking those eyeball to eyeball relationships away and saying, oh, that is just such a waste of your time. You've got more important things to do. So you order up your funeral, everything else right online there, and forget about people. And you
Yeah.
know what happens? We saw it during COVID.
Mhm.
People go crazy because they need people, and they
Right.
don't know they need people.
Right.
And I was at this Harvard flourishing conference, human flourishing. Boy, you talk about an experience. Here I am. Poor Harvard right now is just a sad place. There's just this sad countenance. This is not Disneyland, man. I'm telling you.
I've ever heard those two words together. Poor Harvard. That's good. I like that. It's good.
But these people are at this camp. These are all professionals. They're
Yeah.
degreed. They're from all over the world, from Malta. I had a wonderful interactions, but they're talking about love, Don. Man, this
Yeah.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Love,
Yeah.
as a,
Yeah.
as a concept and relationships. And so, I just think that we need to look at some of the fundamental drivers of where technology wants to take us. It
Yeah.
is absolutely
Yeah.
worth examining. They
But
say
it's
that the
scary,
yeah,
right? It's scary, Robert. And so I want to, going back to COVID, you
you
tell
bet.
the story of Dr. Andrew Smith,
Right.
right? So and because I look at the future and I talk to a lot of executives and they're a little, what about this? What about this? What if this happens? What the implications are kind of scary. And that can lead to, especially when my middle daughter was a behavioral neuroscience major. And so when you look at the brain, our little amygdala gets triggered and it's
Sure.
fight, flight, or freeze. So how do we overcome that? How did Andrew Smith overcome that when COVID broke out and he just found his whole executive staff just frozen?
Exactly. And thank you for asking about that. That was a fascinating story. I actually saw him on the NBC Nightly News because if you'll go back to the scariest days of COVID, there he was, and he had figured out a way to calm his people down. He was chief strategy officer at a small school district north of Charlotte, North Carolina, and when COVID broke out. And he said, Robert, I interviewed him for Forbes, and wonderful guy. He said, Robert, during this whole period, we were just worried. We were getting nowhere. We were just saying, well, what if this happens? What if? And people were just beside themselves. And he had the presence of mind. We talk about tools a lot in this book, right? You and I have talked about tools. So the tool was, in this case, to remember to shift, change. And he asked from his boss, he asked for 2 days off. And he took that time to think, what's going on here? And what tool might I use in this situation? What's my flashlight, in other words, right? And so the tool that he remembered was from a class on crisis management. And he deployed it beautifully because he got into the room next day with this top team and he said, okay, let's put every single one of your concerns and worries up on the whiteboard. Boom. Oh, there's that one. And just go. And I've done this too. And I use this similar process, right? You do too in scenario planning, but you just get all the possibilities out there. And then people okay, and what's the next step? Then we start winnowing down to the ones that are most probable to happen. Oh, that's a helpful tool too. We're calming down now. And then you say, now, what actions do we need to take at this point? So I don't want to go through the tool. I simply want to say to you as leaders, right, listening in on this call, when you get into a juncture like we're in right here as a society, when you get in a juncture like COVID or global financial crisis or whatever the poly crisis that we're talking about, reach for the tool, the proper tool, right? I'm a gardener, so I love using all my tools. And, it's amazing how the right tool will help you get a job done, no matter what that job is, even as something as simple as a shovel or
Yeah.
a hoe or whatever it is, right? But use the right tool, find the right tool, learn the right tool. And so, maybe I don't know how we're doing on time here, but um, maybe we should talk about what tools bring us because they bring us a sense of empowerment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
they open windows for us of opportunity.
Right.
So I was thinking about a young person that I talked to recently, and they said to me, Robert, I'm going to be graduating. I've sent out over 80 resumes and I've gotten nothing back in return, not a zero. And that time of life, when you're just sort of setting sail in your life, your career after college, can be very frightening in any era, in any generation, because you don't know. You don't know what your skills are. You don't know what your value added is, right? And so I would hitchhike around during my own period of this of life. graduated from UC Davis, and um, just said, I'm going to take a year off here to kind of explore. And so I'd travel around and I'd hitchhiking, or I worked on a ship in Alaska and did all these kind of crazy things, like working on a ski resort in Switzerland. But people would pick me up, guys say, well, hey, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Who are you? And I started saying, I'm a poet or I'm a writer. And it just sort of kind of just, I'd written for the college paper and whatnot, but it just sort of stuck with me. And I thought, maybe that's my thing in life. But, in reading all these biographies, I love, that figuring out that, or reading about that period, like Mark Twain, hell, he went here to see his sister and then he traveled over. He didn't know what he was going to do.
Right.
But if we approach that period with trepidation, fear, right? And we say, well, I've sent these resumes out. There's nothing I can do. Then, so what I like to, suggest, and we're all at some sort of juncture,
Right.
what I like to suggest is, how are you running your brain on this whole deal, right?
Well, and finish that story
Yeah.
too, Robert, because
Okay.
how did it end up, right? How did the kid end up getting at least an interview for a job, right? Wasn't it that human connection?
Well, yes, yes, yes. And I want to, yeah, but that particular individual went to work as a volunteer at a hospital.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't what she had planned. And maybe that's the metaphor here. But yeah, you've got to shift. You've got to be willing to try this, try that, to experiment. I mean, that is the essence of navigating in this era, is that, the old paradigm, the old way we did X is over,
Right.
But
Right.
I'll give you an example. A couple of these kids, at a previous Lead Where You Stand conference, I was sitting at a table. They had the back, it's moved to the Hilton now by popular demand. That conference is so, David Brooks is coming and all these really great thinkers. And but we were sitting there in this tent where we had the lunches and dinners, and you got to socialize with all kind of really interesting people. And Westmont is very smart because they invite like 17 of their best and their brightest, and they know this is a incredible opportunity. But a couple of the students were sitting there, and we were asking them a little bit about their future, and they were kind of, well, I don't know, and I'll never forget my good buddy Chris Cherwin, who used to have an office just directly beneath mine here in the building that I'm in Santa Barbara. But Chris Cherwin, without a beat, just said, "Hey, give me your contact information. I want to talk with you. I want to give you an opportunity here, right?" And so many doors are being slammed in these young people's faces. It's not a pretty sight right now. Uh,
Right.
the technology director out at Westmont College is a big believer in helping his students to get placed with local businesses, right? But he's been on the phone this year and perhaps other years in recent times, and he's getting them. He's getting, well, Robert, we're using Claude now, so our engineers are 3 times more effective. And and so we
Yeah.
don't really need your new hires. We don't need these young people.
Right. Right.
And I'm saying, wow,
Yeah.
um,
And I'm
that's
hearing the same thing, Robert.
good.
But I think where I want to make a pivot though is
Yeah,
there what I'm hearing over and over and over. I work primarily with tech companies, right? But what I'm
right.
hearing over and over is I don't need technical people. I don't need engineers. I'm not hiring you for your skills. I'm hiring you for your attitude. I can train the skills. And what I've been hearing, and I don't know, I'm not going to predict the implications of this, but I've been hearing it more is I'm looking for liberal arts majors because it talks about that diversity, right? And Westmont
Yeah,
College is obviously a great example of that.
yeah, yeah.
But it's I don't need narrow and deep. I need broad and wide because what's narrow and deep, I can easily quote unquote replicate, right? It's repeatable. It's knowledge. I need somebody that's, well, as our Alvin Toffler, the futurist, says, I need someone, paraphrasing, who can learn, unlearn,
Unlearn.
and relearn.
That's
Right.
right.
And it's that agility that it's that flashlight. We need to see
Right.
what's coming and then pivot. And so I'm curious because the futurizing the decision is kind of the what I'm coming back to.
Yeah.
How do we futurize the decision? It seems like it takes some level of thinking. And what I'm sensing is a lot of AI permeating our thinking where we're outsourcing our thinking to AI. And that's dangerous. And Andrea has
Right.
a great
Right.
question in the chat where she asks, where is that border? Right? How do we not just outsource our thinking to AI, but
Right.
we are actually in control? We're just not just parroting back AI, but we're actually thinking. Where is that line? Right?
Well,
How do
thank
we
you for, yeah, thank you
use it
for
as a
asking that
tool? But
question. Right.
yeah,
First of all, just let's acknowledge the power of a good question. Right. And so thanks to Andrea there
yeah,
for asking that in the chat. Henry Ford once said that thinking is the hardest work there is, which is why so few people are willing to do it. But aside from that, I think there is a great danger there, especially among young people, of outsourcing our thinking. And I think if you get nothing more out of this interaction, this session together on these life hacks, it's don't outsource your thinking because that's your value, right? People, so many people are trying to compete with AI, and you'll never compete with AI. But where you will prevail in this new world and will make your mark and make it your time, right, is if you tune in to your worldview, if you add by having a sense of history and drinking in a history and the stories and the lives that inspire you, right, to go further, to think bigger. And it takes courage, right, to think your own thoughts and not just to uh, cut and paste the thoughts of some robot. They may be on the surface beautifully written. I mean, they're all complete sentences. They have a period at the end of them. They start with a capital letter
right,
and no em dashes, by the way.
right, right, right.
uh, but the fact of the matter is, if we're outsourcing our thinking over the long haul and maybe even over the short haul, all is going to be lost because the people that I meet in life and in work and in organizational settings in my journey around the world, the people that are happiest are the people that have some sort of specialized insight or skill um,
Or even just curiosity, right? What is that beer commercial? The most interesting man in the world. Stay curious, my friends, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's that kind of curiosity. And I think that goes back to your metaphor of the information diet, right? Which I
right,
love that because how
right,
many fad diets have come and gone? And invariably, they focus on cutting all carbs, on increasing protein, on
right,
counting your macros. They all are simplistic in nature when in reality, you need a varied diet. You need
right.
you need to have carbs, you need to have energy, you need to have protein, you need to have sugars, you need to have all that stuff, all of
Right.
it in moderation. And I wonder how that impacts our thinking, right? Your information diet. How does that impact how we think going forward? What would you suggest we do with our information diet?
Well, you folks that are engineers and technology people have a phrase GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, right? So at a very baseline level, if we're putting empty calories in there, we're going to have nothing to really burn on, fuel on, and so that's it's a sort of simplistic metaphor, but I think revolutionizing our information diets, asking smart people what they read. What have you read lately? I'm part of a wonderful bike group here in Santa Barbara. Um, Folks, guys that are in their 70s and 80s. And boy, I'll tell you, we have the most interesting, fascinating discussions because people are all reading different books and different things. And we also have the stories of our lives, right? So if that's
Mm,
part of your information diet, if
absolutely.
we're young people, ask people um, about their perspective on different things, and you won't get a great answer from everybody if the person is cynical, but I just really think this is so important. Like you said, be curious
Yeah.
because the answers are around. Your opportunity set is around. It's within people. It's not sitting at a screen. It's not doom scrolling. Um, it is, the solutions and the path forward. We're not like ending this whole thing called human life, even though
Oh,
we sometimes feel very perplexed by uh, the kind of corruption that is going on right now in Washington and the
right.
corruption of our wonderful government, the rule of law, just all of the civility that is surrounded. I think of one of my favorite biographers, David McCullough, and
Mm-hmm.
I've just been really meditating on something. He said he had 54 honorary doctorates. He wrote about Churchill. I mean, excuse me, about Harry Truman and John Adams, and just a very distinguished man. I remember in Santa Barbara here driving by a local theater, the Granada, and seeing his name that he was going to be appearing, and I was so darn busy, I didn't get to see him, hear him speak, and he died shortly after that. But he said something at one of these ceremonies, and he said, the study of history is really about um, the study of all those who have come before who gave us these great things, these great institutions that we built up, these great buildings, and all of this marvelous thing. And it just tears your heart out to see that right now we're just tearing these things down in the interest of making what some would call progress or a golden age or some new order of things that is going to be better.
But I
um,
think you and I can agree, Robert, right? We're not fighting against progress, right? That's
Not
not
at
the
all.
goal.
No,
Progress is going to come. I
no.
mean, I'm old, but I remember when there was a big argument about calculators in the classroom. You
Right,
can't have calculators in the classroom. Kids won't be able to do math in their head. They were right that kids now can't do math in their head. Okay,
right.
and
Yeah,
what are the implications of that? When are they going to
right,
be without Siri and Google? And all that? So again, we don't want to be doomsayers on here. We do want to
right.
say the implications could be this or it could be this, and we need to, as one, I shared a stage with an influential podcaster, and he said we need to let humans human and we need to let machines machine. And I think that, back to Andre's question, is kind of how do we find that line? Right?
Yeah,
What are humans inherently good at that, at least right now, machines are not that good at? And don't say empathy because they've proven that is actually not all that true. Machines are actually pretty good at empathy, better than some of
right,
the executives that I coach. So,
right.
what can we leverage as humans where we have I'll call it a competitive advantage over machines, over AI, over where this is trending?
Well, you batted away empathy there, but
I know.
I think I want to bring it back into the
Okay.
discussion as we wrap up here. But I would say wisdom.
Okay.
I would say judgment. I
That's
would
good.
say civility.
Mm-hmm.
I would say ethics. I would say learning from history and honoring those who came before who have paved the way. I would
Good.
say gut instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Trust your gut,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And trust that you can learn from making mistakes and taking
Mm-hmm.
risks, but don't stop taking risks, right?
Yeah.
In fact, take more of them because, when people get my age, we start looking back and saying, it's not so much the mistakes that I made, and boy, I made a few, but it's the risks that I didn't take.
Yeah.
You know, see
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I had that opportunity to do X and I squandered it, or Y, or Z. But we must wrap. I'm getting a signal here from my producer.
Let me,
Yeah,
can I ask
please.
one
Yeah,
final
absolutely.
question?
Yeah,
Because
you
this
bet.
really ties into your age of acceleration. And one of the statements that just resonated with me, and it kind of goes with what you're saying, is build a life, not a resume. Right. And I think those risks, you take risks in life. Building a resume, you may take the safe approach, but that's not your recipe for the future. Right. You're saying you need to build a life, not a resume. Anything you would add to that based on what you just said?
Well, I came up with that line for commencement address at my alma mater, UC Davis, and that I ended with those words: "Build a life and not a resume." And I really believe that. Build a life by practicing all of the kind of qualities that we had. Don't substitute for short termism where you think, "Wow, if I do this," I used to have this thing, this little saying that I would use. If we're needy or greedy, our intuition has no ignition. And you think about the decisions that you've made, and gosh, I was kind of greedy there. I thought, yeah, wow, I'll make $1 jillion. But this one guy, I did a lot of interviewing over the years, but this for this first book that I wrote in '86 called "Winning the Innovation Game," I interviewed a bunch of entrepreneurs and innovators, and this one guy named Doug Green said, "Robert, if I don't feel right about a decision in my gut, I won't do it. I don't care if I make a jillion dollars." I said, "Well, Doug, how does that?" He said, "Well, it just feels like I've had a good meal. If I'm making, a right decision, a sound decision here." And I think we build our lives on good decisions,
Right.
and one at a time, right?
Right.
And so if folks are on the call and you've got a decision, maybe some of what we've talked about today will help you to instruct that. And maybe the decision is not yours to make, but maybe someone in your life, your family, your son or your daughter, and they're trying to make the right decision. And sometimes it's not like helping them to make the choice between A or B, but rather looking at the context of that. And so I just really enjoy speaking with you, Don, about these matters, because I think you and I are very much on the same page, and yet you have a unique perspective there that I don't have. And
Again, we're
and
broadening our information diet, right?
exactly, and hopefully our perspective as well. So I want
Right.
to thank you and thank all of the folks who are listening in on this podcast, and hopefully we have given you some work-life balance hacks or techniques that you can use to further your future. So thank you all, and that's a wrap.